Basically, my presentation will be different photos, which will enable me to explain in brushstrokes what Garrocha is and how I've been able to develop my own theories because of the fact that those volcanoes are there in the first place. So let's take a look at some photos, and I will talk you through them.
Hay un problema con el puntero, pero ya lo iremos solucionando. Previamente, ya entrando en tema, Joan ya comentó, visteis ayer, su charla, pues que pasó un mapa. Yo ya paso la segunda parte de ese mapa, o sea, de territorios volcanes en el mundo hay muchos.
And as you can see from the map, there are a multitude of volcanoes across the world. Some are on tectonic plates, and some are between plates, the interplate volcanoes. Like here in the Canary Islands, we can see yellow and red dots on the map. The red dots are historically active volcanoes. That means that they've been written down in the annals of history, like Pompeii or Vesuvius. The Canary Islands, there are many of them, and in Europe, if we zoomed in, we will zoom in, we can see that in Europe that we have yellow dots. This means that we do not have any historical records of these volcanoes, but they are considered to be active. Okay, so red and yellow are active, but they're not currently active. We quite simply do not have historical records of the yellow dots. They're not written down anywhere. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So if we zoom into the map of Europe, we could perhaps see this as a sub-conference within the overall conference. Cooking, volcanic cooking, and European volcanoes could be the sub-theme. And there's a rift, a fault line that was formed many thousands of years ago across the continent. And you can see it goes through Germany, Czech Republic, middle of France, through Catalonia, and all the way down to Morocco. And some people even draw a link between this rift and the Canary Islands. They think it even reaches to the Canary Islands. And many of these spots are protected natural areas because they have rich soils, they are farmland. So there's a great amount of human activity that takes place on these volcanic areas. We can say Garrocha is number 5, but in France, in Germany, north of Prague, Czech Republic there too, on the Iberian Peninsula as well. We have in the Mar Menor volcanoes that are much older. And the Mal de Alboran, we also have some volcanoes down there. But let's now focus and zoom in even more to my region, Garrocha in Catalonia. Now you can see that the reality here is entirely different from what we see here in the Canary Islands. It's very damp. We have 100 liters of rainfall per year. 1,100 is there compared to 100 here. So we're talking about 1,000 liters of rainfall more every year. And the soils are very rich, and we have a great biodiversity and human populations as well. So the question is often asked is, are they active volcanoes? Let's move on to the next slide. This is not La Garrocha, it's a simulation, a historical simulation. The last eruption was 8,000 years ago, so this is a historical recreation of an ancient population closer to the sea. Well, the sea now is about 30-40 kilometers away as the crow flies. But during the Neolithic era, there were people, and as I say, it's not written down in the annals of history, but there were people who would have seen an eruption in La Garrocha. That's 8,000-9,000 years ago. So the time periods are much more extended than the Canary Islands. In fact, we have an active volcano right now in Lanzarote. There was a volcanic eruption in the 18th century as well. So this is the Akraskat volcano in the natural park. It's a non-volcanic region, but we have flat valleys, we have lava flows. This is all created by volcanic activity in the not-too-distant past. And I read around. I've read reports by economists as well to understand how we can relate volcanism with society. And Ernest Lluch, back in the 1960s, who was the Minister of Health in Spain, was a passionate fan of La Garrocha, and he tried to investigate across Europe what parks had been industrialized, because going back to the 18th century, there was significant industrial activity, beginning with the textile industry, paper factories. And in fact, there still is an industrial tradition in this region. So it is or was originally a very rural area. And the idea is that we're talking about shared regions with shared activities. In simple terms, we're not talking about it being simple shared regions. They're not so simple, but they are shared. But there is so much more value, much more natural wealth to these regions because of the volcanic soil, because of the people that have been working there. Now, obviously, we're in La Geria, on the island of Lanzarote. There is nothing simple or simplistic about what is done here. The work that has been done here is exceptional, to say the least. So this is the region, the area close to my house. I live in a rural estate, an old Catalonian house next to this valley. Here you can see we have pasture lands, woodlands. In fact, this is the most wooded area of Catalonia. And this is due in part to the volcanoes. Next slide. You can see there are not lava flows here, but this photo was taken only 3 weeks ago. We have beech forests, and it's thanks to the volcanic soil that we have this, because they've enriched the soil, they retain the humidity. We're talking about 400 meters of altitude in this part of Spain. Normally, this type of woodland would grow at 800 meters, so this helps the soil to be more fertile. Another slide. In our region, there is a school of art, the Buchalot School of Art, which is based on landscape paintings, and this was a painting in which you can see the ancient landscape traditions. You can see it's eminently rural. Another picture. It's a Montes del Coppen, which is near Olot, also very famous. And I would like to spend a couple of minutes on this image, because there is an onion, a wonderful, sweet onion, which is grown in this region. We will hear about this from the chefs from the restaurant later. And in fact, there is a whole range of different anecdotes about the growing tradition in this region. You can speak to local farmers about this, but in simple terms, volcanic soils make grass and vegetables sweeter. There's a basaltic plateau next to a valley which is not basaltic, and the shepherd there says that the sheep, when they take them to this area, and they literally escape and run to the volcanic fields to eat the grass because it's sweeter. But when the shepherd takes the sheep to the other plains that do not have basaltic soil, then the sheep don't want to go there. You can't even fool them to go there. And this is quite simply because grass that grows on basaltic fields are sweeter. My parents were farmers, and they had a cow. And they explained that they sold their cow to another farmer who took them to another cow, and the cow almost died because it quite simply didn't want to eat the grass growing in those fields. So you can see that even for cows, the grass is greener on the other meadows that are basaltic. And in this image, you can see also that there are certain different points of geological interest where people can go and understand and learn more about volcanic activity. This is the Akraskat Volcano. And you can see that our architects have created a path for interpretation of volcanic phenomena and so on and so forth. This is Casofit de la Roca, which is a village which is on top of a basaltic cliff, which is also another point of interest at the local level. You can see also different routes over the lava flows, and you can see the Giant's Causeway of Ireland, but here in our region. And again, we have guided tours, interpretation of local geological phenomena. And we also have signage explaining the geological phenomena. And this is a great attraction both for locals and for visitors that come to see and understand the phenomena that you can find in our region. Another product that ties society and volcanoes together is, as you can see in this photo here, we have a lava flow, and this is what we call practicar. This means that the bedrock is slowly converted into agricultural land through human efforts over the years. And this was done in the 18th century. And we have seen in the past that there was the conversion that happened in Spain over the past, how the churches were then reformed and people began to work in different fields and how they started working in different areas. And the lands, in fact, were confiscated from the churches and they were shared out between the people, and then they started to work the lands. So how were these lands made into agricultural lands? Well, these were valleys, and they were highly populated in the past. And why were they so populated in the past? Here we can see another close-up of a wall, and let's move on to the next slide. I would like to just dally a minute on this. This is Machine. It's a wetlands area of the region, and you can see that it was originally a lava flow, but it's become as it looks today. And this is where industry began. There was a certain textile called the Indianas textile. It was first produced in Barcelona, and then they brought it to this zone and copied it here. But because of the chemical properties of the water, because of the lava, they managed to create a red dye that was unique to the zone, and this is why they began to create textiles, and the textile industry took off in this region. It was a cottage industry, but then it began to grow across the region, and this is because of the specific features of the volcanic rock that creates the Indianas textile with this red dye. This was at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. And the city of Olot at this time, at the end of the 18th century, had nearly 20,000 inhabitants, and Barcelona was only 13,000. So Olot was the fourth biggest city in Catalonia at this time. And this is due to the Indianas cloth that was being produced. There were no roads. They all had to be transported out of the village on primitive carts, and there was such an explosion in the population that they had to expand across the lava fields to be able to house and feed all the workers that came flooding into the village. And because of this production, they began to use the energy created by water so that they could create these new factories, and then they created a paper factory, textile factories, and so on and so forth. And this is why we have the water features that you can now see. This is within our region. And you can see that because of the economic growth of the region, because of the volcanic soils that led to the economic growth of the region, that led to the building of modernist buildings, as you can see. This is the town of Olot. Barcelona, naturally, as you all know, has the Gaudi modernist buildings, but we also have some wonderful examples in the town of Olot. such as this building, which is next to the town church. Next slide, please. Other villages that retain their agricultural essence, but you can see they are very medieval in their shape. This is Santa Pau. This could be considered, it's next to Santa Margarita, which is where the last eruption took place, and this is a tourism center, the capital of the volcanic region, so to speak. Now let's also look at the local products. And we geologists call these indicator products. There are many different, but one fine indicator product could be the fejols de Santa Pau, which is a type of bean that we grow locally. They are also DO, and they have their protected domination of origin, and they have to be grown on modern volcanic soil, the endosols. So to grow these beans, you have to grow them on these types of soil, and if you do not grow them on these modern volcanic soils, then they are not protected by this designation of origin, by the PDO. So these beans are very popular. They can mix with butifarra sausages and oil and onions. And they don't need to be peeled. They retain their essence, their aroma, their flavor, and they're highly appreciated, much appreciated. And they're also very expensive because of the added value of the PDO, so they are almost worth their weight in gold. Now I'd like to quickly run through a few slides on certain aspects that I think might be interesting. We've seen the overview of the volcanoes, but we can now have a close-up look at the textures that we find on volcanoes. Now, this doesn't really mean anything in terms of social knock-on effects, but the simple beauty of the terrain is worth remarking. We can talk about lava fields and volcanoes, but if we take a look at the layers of a very explosive eruption, you can see there's cross-stratification in these terrains. This is a pseudo-pumice. It's a pumice-like material. We've seen this in La Palma, a vesiculated stone. And these are little treasures, little jewels that you find when you explore volcanic regions that really are very interesting. This is aragonite. This is a thermal crystallization process that produced in the emission of lava from volcanoes, and you can see the beauty of it just by looking at the picture. And this is the last photo. There is a central aspect to tourism, the guides. You can create interactive museums, put signs up all across the landscape, but that would mean nothing without a guide, the human touch, someone who can explain what's happening in the zone. These people are the pillar upon which the whole business is based, because you need this person who can explain what's happening. But if you do not have the right kind of labor conditions to have a good guide, then we're talking about arid landscapes, because there's no explanation. We talk about cooking. We need to be able to train up cooks and help them, support them. Farmers for local agricultural landscapes, but we need guides to explain the history of our landscape. And that's the end of my presentation. I hope I haven't run over by too long. Thank you very much.
Bueno, lo que quería decir es que cada vez me gusta más dar charlas.
I'd just like to conclude by saying that I like giving talks, just explaining with photos, but if anybody has any questions, then I'm happy to answer them, because really, we have many apexes or apices of pyramids, and below that, like in Giza pyramids in Egypt, you can see the tip of the pyramid, but there's much work carried out on the bottom layers. But yes, I think that you've shown us the green lands of your region, the beech forests. But if you come here, you can see that we're talking about entirely different volcanic landscapes. Are we going to have to wait 8,000 years to see something similar here? Or do we need rivers or different vegetation? No, climate is the most important aspect. It doesn't matter how many years you wait here, you're never going to have green landscapes unless there is a huge change. But it's true that the Sahara 6,000 years ago was like a Garden of Eden. It was full of steppes and grasslands and forests. And quite simply, it's changed because of climate. Because of climate change, the Sahara is now a desert. But no, you're never going to have lush green vegetation here as we see in the north of Europe. There's something I didn't explain before, but La Garrocha is a kind of island unto itself. Let me explain that. It's a volcanic island within rocks that are not volcanic. And in social terms and ecosystem terms, it works as if it were an island, not an island within a different landscape. But no, certainly here the climate would have to change substantially for the landscapes to become green. And then it's perhaps more for a sociologist. But I would ask you this. Now, what would lead someone to build a home in these landscapes? No, we're very lucky in La Garrocha in that 1,000 years have to transpire between one eruption and the next, so certainly it will pay off in the long term building a house. But yes, it is true that here in the Canary Islands you have to draw up a hazard map of possible eruptions in the future, and certainly you have to do this kind of mapping exercise if you're going to build a house near a volcano. But in La Garrocha, we don't know where the next volcano will erupt. So perhaps the best approach would be to build a house next to a volcano, because we know that this volcano is semi-dormant and won't be erupting again in the near future. So as I said earlier, we need to look at the landscape, and we also have to understand what kind of volcano are we talking about. People ask me all the time, are they going to erupt again? But monogenetic volcanoes, like the volcanoes that erupted in the past in La Palma, are not going to erupt again. But if we look at what's happening on La Palma, are you still learning? Are you learning anew every day, or are you never surprised by anything? No, I think you learn all the time. And in the case of La Palma, when the eruption is over, I'd like to go there and do a comparison exercise to see the newly produced rocks from this volcano. Look at the lava, see if it's different. Is the ash there different or similar to the ash that we have under our fields in La Garrocha? So I think that we can learn a great deal from it. I think one of the volcanologists said that it's often best to not intervene immediately. We have to be able to recover this land, particularly on the island of La Palma. So what do you think? Should we stand back and leave it alone, or should we try and recover it? I think that certainly we need to place limits on where we're going to step in and recover the land. We've seen that craters have appeared and lava flows have flowed out. And obviously, if you want to work on that, I think the human effort would be too great. So you can create a natural area of protection. You can create a visitor center. And then, well, in the case of the layer of ash all around these eruption zone, you certainly can step in and intervene and do something. In fact, here on the island of Lanzarote, you've used all the ash. And I think it's incredible. We heard the explanations yesterday about how this ash was spread across the island and it was used for farming purposes. But yes, the volcanic cones and craters and the lava flows, I would leave them as they are, untouched. We can create natural areas. We've seen this in Iceland, where they nearly closed the port, and how people were fishing in the sea, and then they were watching the lava flows as they were flowing into the sea, and they've created a tourist itinerary. So you can see how the houses were destroyed by the lava, and how some houses have been invaded by lava. So you can create a geological route or tourist itinerary. And if we conserve it well, then it can be used as an educational exercise. People can go and see that volcanoes have erupted, and this is the process. We can plan, and we can think about mitigation efforts, because we'll never have zero risk, but we can bring risk down by mitigation efforts.
Does anyone have any questions? If not, we'll move on to the next speaker. We were talking about sweet onions, you mentioned. Are there any other particular products that come from this area? Well, there's no particular ingredient apart from what I mentioned, but the livestock is particularly of good quality there because of the quality of the land. So the beef that comes from this area, and also lamb as well, is of excellent quality. The ground is extremely fertile. You can have quite a variety of products rather than focusing on intensive farming of just one. You can have this extensive agriculture, and this gives added value. For instance, the Jabugo Iberian ham is of excellent quality because the pigs are able to move around the countryside. I remember at one point, a doctor told me to eat this particular type of ham because it was good for your health, and I asked him if I could have a prescription. Unfortunately, it wasn't available on prescription, but the same goes for cows. If they have a lot of pasture land, then of course the quality of the meat is going to be better. There aren't then any specific products. We don't have these geothermal springs, as we've seen earlier this morning, but we do have very high quality products because of the volcanic qualities of this land. So thank you very much. It was a delight to listen to you.